action, there could be as many as 100,000 more COVID-19 deaths. President-elect Joe Biden says he is encouraged by news of a possible effective vaccine, but says wearing a mask is still the best way to prevent the spread right now.
With 71 days until he's sworn in, Biden is forging ahead, announcing his own coronavirus task force and being briefed. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who sits on President Trump's task force, praising the group as admired colleagues. The nation's top infectious disease expert says he plans to stay on the job, too.
ABC senior congressional correspondent Mary Bruce, 10 million Americans have now been diagnosed with COVID-19. The Biden transition team threatening legal action to force a key federal government agency to acknowledge the outcome of the election.
The General Services Administration, or GSA, is still not recognizing Joe Biden as the president-elect. Without that official government recognition, the incoming administration does not have access to funding, classified information, and secured facilities to review that information. The Biden transition team says a number of options are on the table to push the GSA to make that designation, including legal action. The GSA administrator, Emily Murphy, is a political appointee named to that position in 2017 by President Trump. Karen Travers, ABC News, Washington.
This morning, the Supreme Court begins hearing arguments against the Affordable Care Act.
That question is whether the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate, which requires Americans to have health insurance, is constitutional. If the law is struck down, an estimated 21 million Americans could lose their health insurance.
That's ABC's Elizabeth Schulze in Washington. President-elect Biden will discuss the ACA after the arguments are heard. A 2-year Vatican investigation into defrocked Cardinal Theodore McCarrick has found a series of bishops, cardinals, even popes downplayed and dismissed reports that he sexually molested adults as well as children. You're listening to ABC News.
So right now may be the perfect time for you to rethink how you pay for health care. And here's why. Not only is it time for open enrollment for a lot of people, it's also when you can join MediShare and save even more than usual. For the typical family, switching to MediShare saves about $500 a month, which is a game changer for a lot of people. Think what you could do with that. But if you join right now, MediShare is waiving their new member fee, so that's another $170 you'll save. And MediShare is really different. It's a community of Christians who share each other's healthcare bills. More than 400,000 people are members, and they've shared over $4 billion in medical bills. So, yes, they can handle your bills, too. This may be the time to make the switch. Join before November 30th for the additional savings. It's so easy to find out more. They're great to talk to. In fact, you can get a price within 2 minutes. Here's the number. Call 877-26-BIBLE. That's 877-26-BIBLE. 877-26-BIBLE.
Tropical Storm Eta now sitting off the west coast of Cuba after drenching parts of South Florida with 1.5 feet of rain. Erica Sennett was taking cover in her home near Fort Lauderdale when the roof caved in.
I got hit on the head by a couple of pieces that fell on the floor, but I'm okay.
And out in the eastern Atlantic, the 29th named storm of the season has come together. That'll be called Theta. Several weeks after contracting the coronavirus, longtime Palestinian spokesman Saeb Erekat has died. He was 65. Fury in the capital of Armenia. Protesters swarming the parliament building, protesting the deal to end the war with Azerbaijan that has been raging since late September. The protesters say Armenia gave up too much. And a letter written by John Lennon showing a flash of anger is going up for auction. ABC's Chuck Sievertson has the story.
Lennon wrote the letter to Tom Bonfield in Kentucky, who wrote to the former Beatle about his religious beliefs. Bonfield said that when he listened to the album Imagine, it conveyed a feeling of hopelessness to him. The handwritten letter by Lennon, dated October 1st, 1971, says, "Listen, brother, why don't you Jesus freaks get off people's backs?" In the accompanying letter of authenticity by Bonfield, he says he aimed to be helpful and non-threatening, but apparently he hit a sore spot with Lennon. Online bidding through RR Auction starts at $2,500. Chuck Sievertson, ABC News.
This is ABC News.
Balance of Nature's fruits and vegetables in a capsule, changing the world one life at a time.
I've been taking the 3 veggie and 3 fruit for 2 years, and I have not gotten sick. It's unbelievable. And I'm not tired. I don't wake up tired. And it's just amazing to me that there's such a difference.
Balance of Nature is now offering 35% off on any new preferred order. Go to balanceofnature.com today and use discount code FRUITS.
Sherry Preston, ABC News.
A cold front headed our way. That, combined with some moisture from the south, will deliver the potential for some heavy rain by the middle of the week. Tonight we'll have mostly cloudy skies, some patchy fog possible tonight with lows in the upper 50s. Partly sunny skies Tuesday. It will be warm, highs in the upper 70s, just a slight chance for rain. Widespread showers and a few thunderstorms likely Wednesday with highs in the upper 70s. For the North Carolina News Network, I'm meteorologist Amy Wilmoth in the Weather Center.
It's time now for My Great America with Jim and Butch, a conversation about positive things about this great country. And now here are Jim and Butch.
Well, good morning, Jim and Butch.
Jim and Butch, you know, we're joined at the hip. Did you hear what they just said in the intro there? They said we're a program that talks about positive things that are happening in America. Now, we're going to drill down on matters related to the election. We wouldn't be following through on our responsibility if we didn't do that. But you know what, Jim? The thing I keep going back to is God is not surprised by anything. He is still on the throne, and at the end of our program today, I'm going to read some scriptures that I really am encouraging people to prepare their hearts to open up and receive, because there's a lot of noise that's out there, a lot of rancor, a lot of animosity, and God is still in control. And the day that we lose our moorings, our anchor, and landmark in that reality which transcends partisan politics is the day that will stagger like a drunken person from one side of the road to the other, depending on circumstances, to do what only God can do in our hearts, which is to create a sense of security that's not born up in man or woman, but born up in the unshakable truths we find in Scripture, who tell us about the world, about our state, and our need for Jesus. Now, we want to make sure that we talk about some local county news, and we actually had a kind of sad but a sweet thing that happened here recently. Talk about our dear friend who just passed away and some of what the county did in response to that.
This man, Jimmy Howell, chief up at Bills Creek Fire Department in that district, touched a lot of lives over the years. He was 72, passed away. He was at the Mission Hospital there in Asheville, and everybody who knew him was touched by his humility and his honesty, and he's a great public servant to people. And it was shocking and surprising he passed it. But what they did, what the community did, the fire departments from all over the county, they went up to Mission Hospital and escorted his body back here with a parade of different fire engines and trucks and all that. Escorted body down here. We do not have the obits on him, complete obit on him yet, but he was it was a great thing that they would do that. And they respect him. I talked with Gary Wilson this morning earlier on my Colorado Reporting, and he was a good friend of Gary's. They grew up together. And Gary's, of course, up at he looks after the Bills Creek Fire District as well as Fairfield Fire District. And Jimmy died the morning after he suffered a heart attack, cardiac arrest. First responders, including personnel from Bills Creek Volunteer Fire Department, responded to the chief's home around 2:30 p.m. Sunday, and he was eventually airlifted to Mission Hospital, where he later died, according to Lieutenant Dallas McRory of the Bills Creek Fire District. So those guys assembling together like that, it must have been a sad but a heartwarming thing to know, and for them to reach out to his family with that kind of thing.
You know, I just remember how powerful it was interacting with first responders, the fire department and police department. Right after 9/11, I was there within days because of our work. I was doing consulting work with the Metropolitan Division of the Salvation Army. So I was down there when there was still smoldering stuff that was happening. And to realize that every single day, folks, in the midst of all the political dumpster fires that we're dealing with right now, there are real fires that are dealt with every single day. And it behooves us to make sure that we're acknowledging, affirming, respecting, and appreciating those who make our communities go 24/7. And when the spontaneous expression of love, respect, and appreciation was given to this fire chief, it's an indication to me that in the midst of all the political rancor, all of the machine gunning that's happening right now on social media, there is an essential goodness that can happen when communities realize we got to look out for each other.
Absolutely.
And the appeal and the ethic of this program is always going to be that. Now, I noticed that you're dealing with a little bit of post-nasal drip. Is that like post-election drip?
That must be what it
I don't know what it is. Whatever the claim might be. My voice actually is a little bit better. You know where I was on Friday and Saturday? And this is fundamentally American. I'll tell this quick story. You know where I was on Friday and Saturday?
No.
Well, I was down at what's called the Yellow Mall in Gaffney. And I have the opportunity to help a dear friend who's an entrepreneur and has one of the fast-growing private companies in America. They actually made the Inc. 5000 list. And it's a store called Everything Must Go. And it's a bin store, if people are familiar with that. But we had 287 people standing in line before the doors opened. And I was the person that had to encourage them, with God's help, not to get impatient, not to get upset. And I have to be blunt. By the end of the day, I did that on Friday and Saturday. I'd been sweet all day to hundreds and hundreds of people. I had to say, Jesus, please help me. I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to go home, take a shower, read my Bible, and crawl into bed. But, how great that we live in a country where creative ideas, strategic ideas from a business standpoint can be launched, and it's fundamentally American. And you know what? If you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, now is the time to go back to what are the essential values of this nation. Because, folks, I want to tell you, it's a penetrating look into the obvious. We're going to jump now into, we're going to bungee jump into the current realities and discussion, but we're going to stay positive in doing it.
All right.
The reality is voter fraud and improprieties in voting has happened throughout American history. And for those who say, no, it couldn't happen, there's nothing that's going on, you simply are not a good student of history. Now, I'm somebody that is fastidious when it comes to things like this, so I've done a little research, Jim, that I want to share with our audience. And again, the goal, and Governor Rick Scott said this, and it needs to be our goal, free and fair elections are, in fact, the foundation of our democracy. The stability of our nation and the trust of our government relies on competence in the election system, the elective system and process. We need 100% participation.
Yes.
It's everybody's responsibility to vote. And we need 0% fraud.
Yes.
So that is the grand goal. That is where all of us as Republicans and Democrats need to make sure that we're making as our North Star. Now, here's the reality, though. There are lots of ways that elections can be compromised. And I'm going to go through a list as I've done some research on this. One is the impersonation fraud at the polls, voting in the name of other legitimate voters and voters who have died, moved away or lost the right to vote because they're felons but remain registered. That's one way. Because some people say you can't, there's nothing that can happen. Yeah. Number two, false registrations. You can have voting under fraudulent voter registrations that either use a phony name and a real or fake address or claim residence in a particular jurisdiction where the registered voter does not actually live and is not entitled to vote. That's a second way. A third way, duplicate voting. Registering in multiple locations and voting in the same election in more than one jurisdiction or state. That's a third way that can happen. Fourth, fraudulent use of absentee ballots. You can request absentee ballots and vote without the knowledge of the actual voter or obtaining the absentee ballot from a voter and either filling it in directly and forging the voter's signature or illegally telling the voter who to vote for. The next is buying votes, paying voters to cast either an in-person or absentee ballot for a particular candidate. The next is illegal assistance at the polls, forcing or intimidating voters, particularly the elderly, disabled, illiterate, and those for whom English is the second language, to vote for a particular candidate while supposedly providing them with assistance. What I'm trying to do is to let you know there are lots of different ways that an election can be compromised.
Sure.
The next is ineligible voting, illegal registration and voting by individuals who are not U.S. citizens, are convicted felons, or are otherwise not eligible to vote. The next is ballot petition fraud, forging the signatures of registered voters on the ballot petitions that must be filled and filed with election officials in some states for a candidate or issue to be listed on the official ballot. Now, those are just some of the ways that an election, Jim, can be compromised. And it's important for us to be educated about what can take place. Now, we have some people who say, well, you know what? It happens so infrequently. I mean, MIT did a 20-year study that said that the number of people claiming to be abducted by aliens or the number of people hit by lightning is greater than the amount of documented voter fraud that has taken place in this country in the last 30 years. That was an MIT study done over a 20-year period looking retrospectively. However, we know from history that there are cases where some collection of these different types of fraudulent activity have affected elections in a dramatic way. For example, we know that the states are responsible for managing the election process, but in 1982, an estimated 100,000 fraudulent ballots were cast in the 1982 Chicago election. After a Department of Justice investigation, 63 individuals were convicted of voter fraud, including vote buying, impersonation, fictitious voter registrations, phony absentee ballots, and voting by non-citizens. In 1994, after an extensive investigation of absentee ballot fraud in a Greene County, Alabama election, 9 defendants pleaded guilty to voter fraud, and 2 others were found guilty by a jury. In 2003, Alan Twigg Simmons, an operative for the East Chicago, Indiana mayor's campaign, persuaded voters to let him bill out their absentee ballots in exchange for jobs. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years of probation and 100 hours of community service. 2004, Chad Staten, a worker associated with the NAACP National Voter Fund in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, pleaded guilty to 10 felony counts for filing false voter registrations during the 2004 presidential election in exchange for crack cocaine. Staten filled out more than 100 forms in such names as Mary Poppins, Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, Dick Tracy, and George Lopez. 2004, 6 Democrats from Lincoln County, West Virginia, pleaded guilty to charges of participating in a conspiracy to buy votes dating back to 1990. 2004, East St. Louis, Illinois, Precinct Committeemen Charles Powell, Sheila Thomas, Jesse Lewis, and Kevin Ellis, as well as precinct worker Yvette Johnson, were convicted of conspiracy to commit election fraud after participating in vote-buying activities in the 2004 election. 2008, Acorn workers in Seattle, Washington, committed what the Secretary of State called the worst case of voter registration fraud in the history of the state of Washington. 2010, and by the way, this happened with Republicans and Democrats. It's not just all Democrats, folks. Paul Shurek, former campaign manager to Maryland Governor Robert Ehrlich, a Republican, was convicted of election fraud after approving a robocall to black voters, telling them not to vote because the Democrats had already won the 2010 gubernatorial election. A circuit court judge spared Shurek jail time, opting to sentence him to 30 days home detention. 2012, rounding the home stretch here, Robert Monroe, identified by prosecutors as the worst multiple voter in Wisconsin history, pleaded no contest to charges that he voted many times in 2011 and 2012 in Scott Walker's recall election. 2012, while running for re-election, Martin, Kentucky Mayor Ruth Robinson, and a cabal of conspirators targeted residents living in public housing and in properties Robinson owned, threatening to evict them if they did not sign absentee ballots that Robinson and her family had already filled out for them. In 2014, Rosa Maria Ortega, a non-citizen, was found guilty on 2 counts of voter fraud for voting in the November 12 general election and 2014 Republican primary runoff. She claimed she thought was a citizen, blamed her lack of education for the mix-up, but prosecutors pointed out that she had previously indicated on a driver's license she was a non-citizen. A judge sentenced her to 8 years of imprisonment. Now, folks, we have a history in our country of people trying to bend the rules and the system. And here are the facts. There is a sitting president of the United States. His name is Donald J. Trump. Until the election is certified, he is the president. He has every right to use the full weight of both his position and our legal system at a state level and a federal level, including up to the Supreme Court, in order to ensure that we get complete transparency. Now, is it going to be possible for us to have a perfect election? No. You're talking about 143 million votes that have been cast. You're going to have problems in the midst of that. But you fly in the face of truth and the very essence of what democracy is all about in this great republic that we know from all of our programs since we started in August has been birthed on a Judeo-Christian foundation. There's no right way to do the wrong thing. Truth will prevail. And those of you that are getting all lathered up and sharing fake news on one side of the equation and the other are forgetting that God is on the throne And our prayer, our strong prayer needs to be that truth will come out and the bright light of God's righteous judgment will reveal exactly, as Jim turns down the volume, because he knows I'm not stirred, but I've got a holy unction here about this. Don't participate in any kind of disparaging activity when it comes to truth. If you don't know it's a fact, don't be out there just hitting the hornet's nest and then complaining that you got stung. Don't do that. So Jim, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to have you do what you do in your inimitable way, which is to bring perspective here.
Well, that's very interesting to find out how widespread it is throughout the country. And of course, those I'm sure were presidential races primarily, and unfortunately, a lot of it takes place on a local level, with mayoral races, sheriff's races. Not belabor the issue, but there's a little county up west of us that was notorious for bringing in enough ballots there into the election day to keep their man in, and it finally got caught up with. But when they'd see how many votes they needed to win, then somehow or other they bring them in, and they did that for years, and finally they were able to. I don't think they ever were convicted or anything, but it served. They served their needs, and they stayed in office for years. And it started changing, of course, when Governor Martin was elected governor, and he did some of the things that Donald Trump was doing, trying to clean the swamp. And you had to, years ago, you had to be a registered Democrat to get any kind of jobs in North Carolina, and of course he stopped that. And so it was an interesting thing. And it's never going to end. I don't think it's going to. We're going to have these folks who think they can beat the system some way. But I like what you said about not paying attention to all the verbiage on Facebook and Twitter and all those things that are not necessarily true. These are sensationalism headline stories. We react on the headlines, and headlines are just headlines. Down in the body of the story is where the meat is. Sometimes even in a story, the truth of the matter is in the very last paragraph of the story. They're perpetuating all the other conspiracy theories up in the story. Down the final paragraph is where they really tell you the meat of the story. So a lot of folks don't get that far down in the story. They react to the headlines and react to the first couple of paragraphs. Oh, did you read what I said? That kind of thing. It's unbelievable.
Well, my phone has just been lit up with people sharing. Did you hear? Did you hear? I heard. One quick example. It was a strong rumor that was being circulated that the Department of Homeland Security had privately printed up ballots with a watermark, and that all of this was going to come to bear. That was shared more than 3.5 million times, and it's patently false. It's just not truth. Yeah. And we are not going to help our president by being seen as a constituency that shares deceit, shares error, even though we're enthusiastically wanting to bring truth to bear. You want to know how you can pray? Pray that the bright light of truth will bring to bear what we believe in our spirit, increasingly, are a number of things that just are wrong that happened with this election. Pray that way. Pray that we'll have some people that were on the inside of things that were conspiratorial who have a conscience that is ignited again by maybe a God they walked away from, a Jesus that they once knew, and they come forward and say, yeah, you know what? We did participate in this kind of thing. Pray that there's a vault that opens and it becomes very clear in a way that's incontrovertible evidence. Because this is, when it goes to a court, hearsay is not going to be the thing that proves this.
You got to have evidence.
You got to have two things. You got to be able to prove in a way that is documented, in a way that's evidentiary, in the way the courts require. You've got to prove the claim that's being made. And then the second thing, and this is important to remember, is you've got to be able to document, too, that whatever took place actually had a material impact on the election. So when we say, for example, there were 132,000 ballots, this is one thing that's circulating out there, it's been said on national television, 132,000 ballots that were marked only for Biden, the courts are going to say, show us the ballots. It's not going to be enough to say, we heard somebody who said something. So pray that God will just peel everything back. The bright light of righteousness and truth will focus attention on what is clearly wrong, and we would argue, obviously, sin. and that the courts will not be swayed on either side by the media declaring people, by folks threatening violence. Now is the time for us to make sure that our hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. And whether you're a Baptist at Florence Baptist or you go to Word of Faith Fellowship like I do, we sing that song, and we believe that. That is where our anchor. Our anchor is there. Our anchor is not in what pollsters say, Fox says, CNN says, or even relatives that, as you anticipate. This is going to be a pretty intense Thanksgiving for a lot of families who've got different political opinions, won't it?
I know you got to wrap things up, but let me sidestep just a moment. You talked about people reading headlines and Facebook stories. That's some of the same kind of things that's happened to your church. People reacting to headlines, reacting to stories that somebody else is passing on because they heard somebody say, somebody else said, and they're not getting right down to the truth of it. And that's the kind of thing you folks have had to deal with for years, because people not reacting to the truth of the matter, but reacting to salacious headlines.
That's Jim. That is so true. And you know what? It's really principled people with integrity like you who are helping more and more in the county. People come to understand. You know what? We just want to be a blessing. We want to love everyone. We're called to love everyone. We're called to be a blessing to everyone. You know, we'd be remiss if we didn't go back to not the Gallup poll or the Fox News or CNN or MSNBC. This is timeless. It is unshakable, and it is absolutely God's word. Listen as we close out the program today, and I trust this will be encouragement. You know, Job was a doubter. Job had that exchange with God where he thought he could change his opinion. Job chapter 37, indeed, at his thunderings, my heart trembles and leaps out of its place. Hear, oh, hear the roar of his voice. Whose voice? God's voice, and the sound of rumbling that goes out of his mouth. Under the whole heaven he lets it loose, and is lightning to the ends of the earth. After it, his voice roars. He thunders with the voice of his majesty, and he restrains not his lightnings against his adversaries when his voice is heard. God thunders marvelously with his voice. He does great things which we cannot comprehend. For he says to the snow, fall on the earth. Likewise he speaks to the showers and to the downpour of his mighty rains. God seals up, stops, brings to a standstill by severe weather the hand of every man, and now under his seal their hands are forced to inactivity, that all men whom he has made may know his doings, his sovereign power, and their subjection to it. Then the beasts go into dens and remain in their lairs. Out of its chamber comes the whirlwind, and cold from the scattering winds. By the breath of God ice is given, and the breath of the waters is frozen over. He loads the thick cloud with moisture. He scatters the cloud of his lightning, and it is turned round about by his guidance, that they may do whatever he commands. Then upon the face of the habitable earth, whether it be for correction or for his earth generally, or for his mercy and loving kindness, he causes it to come. Hear this, O Job, stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. Do you know how God lays his command upon them and causes the lightning of his storm to shine? Do you know how the clouds are balanced and poised in the heavens, the wonderful works of him who is perfect in knowledge? Or why your garments are hot when he quiets the earth in sultry summer with the oppressive south wind? Can you, along with him, spread out the sky, which is strong as a molten mirror? Tell us, Job, with what words of man we may address such a being. We cannot state our case because we are in the dark in the presence of the unsearchable God. So shall it be told him that I wish to speak. If a man speaks, shall he be swallowed up? And now men cannot look upon the light when it is bright in the skies, when the wind is past and cleared them. Golden brightness and splendor come out of the north. If men can scarcely look upon it, how much less upon the terrible splendor and majesty of God himself? Touching the Almighty, we cannot find him out. He is excellent in power and in justice and plenteous righteousness. He does no violence. He will disregard no right. Men therefore reverently fear him. He regards and respects not any who are wise in heart in their own understanding and conceit. The God of the universe sees all of this. Our cries and prayer to him are the most important thing we can do right now, Jim. And whether somebody's a Baptist, a Presbyterian, Assemblies of God, goes to Word of Faith, whatever they may be, now is the time for us to lift up our prayer to the living God that truth, justice, and the American way would occur.
And stand united.
And stand united.
Time's come and gone so fast. It's come and gone so fast.
You know what, Jim? I'm grateful for our chance to try to be a beacon of the community. And here's what I know. I know that God has a plan, and He expects us to participate in that plan, and we're going to be faithful until the day of His coming.
Amen. God bless America.
God bless America.
Thank you for joining us for My Great America with Jim and Butch. Join us each Tuesday and Thursday morning at 9:05 for this enlightening program on 100.9 FM and 590 AM. It's My Great America with Jim and Butch.